All right, so hello everyone. My name is Crystal Miller. I work at the United States Census Bureau. I will be here today presenting along with my colleague Brian Zamperini, who also works with me at the Census. So today we are here to talk about the United States Census Bureau, and how we count people living in the United States every 10 years, specifically people who are vehicle residents and other nomadic communities. So we will start with a quick overview of the Census Bureau. Then next, we will focus on the 10-year census, known as the Decennial Census, and how we go about counting everyone who lives in the country. We will describe the wide variety of living quarters and situations where people live, and how we count the people we find at these places. And again, our goal for today is to provide insight on how the Census Bureau counts our entire country, including counting vehicle residents and again, nomadic communities, and provide insight to people who weren't aware that the Census Bureau even counted people in the vehicle residency community. So, and encourage them to be counted and included during our next census in 2030. So we're going to answer any questions that you may put into the chat at the end of the presentation. So now I'll turn it over to Brian to give you an overview of the U.S. Census Bureau and the decennial count.
Okay. Thank you, Crystal. So next screen.
Yes, so I'm having some technical difficulties with. Okay, there we go.
Okay, there we go. Okay, so what does the Census Bureau do? Who are we and what do we do? So our mission at the Census Bureau is to serve as the nation's leading provider of quality data about its people and economy. And we are authorized to, we operate under Title 13 and Title 26 of the U.S. Code. And our goal is to provide the best mix of timeliness, relevancy, quality, and cost for the data we collect and the services we provide. The Census Bureau conducts 3 censuses: the decennial census, where we count each person living in the United States every 10 years, the economic census, and the census of governments. And we also conduct several surveys, including the American Community Survey, various economic and demographic surveys, and our newest survey, the Household Pulse Survey. Here is a list on this screen of the other economic and demographic data that the Census Bureau collects regularly. But today we are going to focus on the decennial census. So this is the official count of the April 1st, 2020 U.S. Decennial Census. This population count includes the 50 states plus the District of Columbia. And of course, the population has grown and changes every day. And you can go to census.gov to get the latest estimate of the population, plus additional information on data related to any of the surveys that were on that prior slide. Census does put out a lot of graphics and a lot of interesting ways of presenting the data that we collect. So if you are interested, I encourage you to visit census.gov. So what is the decennial census? The decennial census is conducted every 10 years and counts each person residing in the United States, as well as the number of housing units. So what we count is, so the last census was 2020. The next census is 2030. So it is on the years that end in 0. We do set this decennial census is conducted in the 50 states, the District of Columbia, and also the Puerto Rico and the island area territories. The census also collects other demographic data and housing information such as age, sex, race, and whether the housing unit is owned or rented. The first U.S. Census was conducted in 1790 during the first term of the first president, George Washington. The U.S. Constitution empowers the Congress to carry out the census in Article 1, Section 2. It also dictates that the census is conducted every 10 years. Article 1, Section 2 of the U.S. Constitution mandates that an apportionment of representatives among the states must be carried out every 10 years. Therefore, apportionment is the original purpose of the decennial census as intended by our nation's founders. Apportionment is the process of dividing 435 membership or seats in the U.S. House of Representatives among the 50 states, based on the state population counts that result from each decennial census. The apportionment results are the first data published from each census, and those results determine the amount of political representation each state will have in the Congress for the next 10 years. Census data is also used to help guide trillions of dollars in federal funds distribution that in turn informs tribal, federal, state, and local government planning decisions. And it also serves as the data backbone for the next decade. They inform business and nonprofit organization decision making and provide population benchmark for every other representative survey in the U.S. So how do we conduct the census? This graphic shows a snapshot of the process. First, we establish where to count by building an address list. This includes every address in the country, and it forms the basis of the census. Then we motivate people to respond. Self-response, in other words, responding to the census on your own, is easier than ever. We provide different ways in which people can self-respond, including via the internet. We also make sure to count people living in non-traditional housing called group quarters or in transitory locations, and this is what we'll focus on today, as well as provide an opportunity for people experiencing homelessness to be included. We will talk about these two concepts shortly. Some people will still not respond on their own, and we follow up with them by visiting them, and this is called non-response follow-up. And then finally, we tabulate and release the census results first to the President of the United States and then to the American people. Now that we've reviewed the primary uses of census data, let us take a look at how data are used to benefit communities. The results of the census help determine how trillions of dollars in federal funds are spent every year. It helps communities get their fair share for schools, hospitals, roads, and public works. The results also inform how funding is allocated to federal programs, including Medicaid, Head Start, block grant programs for community mental health services, and Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, otherwise known as SNAP. Census results are also valuable to businesses, as business owners rely on census data to make decisions such as where to open new stores, factories, and offices, where to expand operations, where to recruit employees, and which products and services to offer. The decennial census collects information through a questionnaire. The questionnaire asks respondents to provide key information including name, sex, age, race, and Hispanic origin, relationship among household members, and whether the housing unit is rented or owned. Please note the exception that people living in group quarters are not asked relationship among household member question or the ownership of the residence. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. Data collected are confidential and protected by federal law, Title 13 of the U.S. Code. Results from the census are released in form of data products, and all these data products you can find at census.gov if you're curious to see any of them. The ones listed here, the data products released, are all available for public viewing and on our website, and you can view them. And these products that developed from the 2020 census include apportionment and redistricting files, demographic profiles, demographic and housing characteristic files, congressional district summary files, and privacy protected microdata files. Depends on how much interest you have, but there is a lot of data out there. We also want to reiterate that the data we collect is confidential and is protected by federal law. So now I'll turn it over to Crystal, who will talk about the different types of living quarters that we collect, that we focus on during the decennial census. Crystal?
Okay, thank you, Brian. The Census Bureau defines living quarters as places where people can live or stay. And we try to figure out all the different types of places people are living or staying, and then place them into three categories. And the three categories are listed here, and I'll go through all of them. So the first one, housing units, and normally a housing unit is a house, an apartment, a group of rooms, or a single room occupied or intended for occupancy as a separate living quarters. So now the next two, the focus of this presentation is really these next two groups here that I'll discuss. So transitory locations, those are locations that are comprised of living quarters where people are unlikely to live year round due to the transitory, temporary, impermanent nature of these living quarters. And lastly, group quarters or GQs. And a GQ is a place where people who are typically not related live or stay in a group living arrangement that is owned or managed by an entity or organization providing housing and or services for the residents. So um, most people in vehicle residency situations will probably fit into either the transitory location category or the group quarters category. And I'll talk a little bit more about both. Both of us will talk about them, but specifically I'll get into the group quarters situations. So um, I just described what group quarters or GQs are. And like I said, they're places where people who aren't related to each other usually live or stay. And here's a list of examples of different types of GQs, which include places like college, university housing, nursing, and skilled nursing facilities, correctional facilities like jails and prisons, military barracks. Plus, we include service-based enumeration locations where people who may be experiencing homelessness receive services and the like. So the Census Bureau has also developed special procedures to provide opportunities for people who are experiencing homelessness and receiving services to be counted, which I'll go over shortly. But I will mention here the time frame that we do the group quarters enumeration in will normally be late March, April to May in 2030. That's when we plan to do that type of enumeration. And how we do it is essentially we reach out to the managers or administrators of these facilities and to get the residents at those facilities counted and get their data, get their census data. So, like I mentioned, a subset of the group quarters is service-based enumeration. And so this is where some people that are vehicle residents would be counted and included in the census as part of this group. And again, when we say enumeration, is just essentially a fancy word for counting, but sometimes I slip kind of into using those terms, census terms. But anyway, the service-based enumeration, or SBE, like I said, is a subset of the group quarters operation and is conducted over 3 days, typically the last 3 days in March. We haven't determined when the actual days will be for 2030 yet. It's still quite early, but just towards the end of March, we will be conducting service-based enumeration, and we go to a certain type of facility, and they're listed here, and I'll go through them now. So one of the first ones we go to are emergency and transitional shelters. And those are facilities where people experiencing homelessness stay overnight. Soup kitchens, where these facilities typically offer meals organized as food service uh, lines or bag lunches. Next, regularly schedule mobile food vans, and essentially those are street locations where mobile food vans regularly stop to provide food to people experiencing homelessness. And lastly, targeted non-sheltered outdoor locations, which are locations where people stay without paying, such as under bridges, encampments, or in their vehicles. This enumeration normally takes place late in the evening. So one of those 3 nights during service-based enumeration is where we would go out and our enumerators would go and count the people that they find in these areas, the areas that we have essentially targeted. So now we can talk more about how people and vehicles are counted for during the service-based enumeration operation. So, like I mentioned earlier, we are hoping that people start to see themselves, see their individual living situations in some of the information that we have given. So, when the next census comes, you're more inclined to participate in during the census in 2030. So the census allows for the counting of some vehicles during SBE or service-based enumeration, and these locations can include vehicles parked in retail parking lots like Walmart or outdoor pro shop. Those are popular places where we found people living in vehicles staying. Restaurant parking lots like maybe Cracker Barrel, those kinds of places. Also along city streets, and I've heard a lot of in the earlier presentations during the summit, I've heard a lot of talk about these types of situations, and all of those things. We would count those people during this part of our 2030 count. So, also any vehicle encampments, as well as vehicles parked in safe parking lots or national parking programs. I also heard Dr. Proust talking about the wide variety of programs, which is something, I wasn't aware of previously, that there are so many different types of safe parking programs, but that is definitely one thing we're going to take back at Census and try to determine how we can get all of those kinds of programs included in our next census. So now I will turn it back over to Brian to discuss more about transitory locations.
Okay, thank you, Crystal. So the enumeration of transitory locations is another operation where people living in vehicles will be counted. The enumeration of transitory locations operation counts people living or staying in transitory locations who do not have another place where they live or stay most of the time. TLs are places where people are unlikely to live year-round due to the transitory or temporary nature of the locations. And generally, people staying at a transitory location either pay fees to stay there or work at the location temporarily. So this is different from the SB locations that Crystal just described, in that these are pay-to-stay type of RV parks or places. So these include RV parks, campgrounds, marinas, hotels and motels, racetracks, carnivals, and circuses. That makes up the ETL operation. The enumeration of transitory locations occurs in middle March through middle April during the census year, the next time in 2030. Now, if you were staying in a location in 2020, we did have to push this operation. It was intended to be middle March to middle April to September because of the COVID pandemic. So if you participated in 2020, you might have seen us out there in September at your campground or RV park. But typically, we're going to shoot to do this March or April. To count people living in transitory locations, we schedule a day with that location. So we'll call the manager of the location, schedule a date and time at that location, let's say an RV park. On the day of the count, the census workers visit the RV park and count the people staying there on the day of the count. If the census worker finds an RV parked on a site, they will attempt to conduct the interview with a person staying in the RV. The interview questions are the same as a housing unit questionnaire. This is considered a housing unit survey and include the name, sex, date of birth, age, race, Hispanic origin, and how the people in the RV, if there's more than one, are related to each other. We also ask if anyone living or staying in the RV has another place where they usually live or stay, and if so, do they stay at that other location most of the time? This allows us to ensure that the person is counted in the right place. For example, if a person is staying at an RV park in Arizona and is there only for the winter, and during the rest of the year stays at a home or an RV park in Michigan, then we would count them at the place where they live most of the time. If the person lives in the RV park full time or travels full time, then we would count them in the RV park where they were interviewed on the day we interviewed them. So if you were interviewed on a Saturday at an RV park in Arizona, then moved on a Sunday to an RV park in New Mexico, you would be counted at the RV park in Arizona because that's where we interviewed you. The interviews we do at RV parks during this date and time is done in one day. We would send enough enumerators to conduct the interviews in one day, and then we don't go back. This overview, so this is an overview of the count process we use for RV parks, campgrounds, and marinas. And hotels are done a little bit differently, but the concept is still the same. Are you living or staying at a hotel most of the time? Uh, the count is done just a little bit different. But that's what I have to say on transitory locations. I'll turn it back over to Crystal. Thank you.
Okay, so lastly, we wanted to mention mobile questionnaire assistance. So although we have discussed how we count people in vehicle residency situations, if you feel you have not been counted or unaware, if you were counted, you can complete the census by phone, online, or through one of the community events supported by mobile questionnaire assistance. So the Census Bureau staff work closely with community organizations, local governments, and stakeholders to host these mobile questionnaire assistance events in neighborhoods, at community events, at resident gatherings, places like that. And again, the hope is that we build trust and support to support response of the census. And Census Bureau staff will be at these locations and be available to answer any questions and provide additional information and promotional material. So this is essentially a catch-all. Like, we would prefer for you, if you're in like an SBE area, to be counted there, or if you're in a transitory location area, to be counted there. But if at some point you feel like you weren't included, you can always go to a mobile questionnaire assistance event. If you hear of them, you can always submit your response by calling the census or online. So it's essentially our catch-all of anyone who feels like they were missed could be still counted. So I just wanted to reiterate here how important it is to be counted, and that we want to count everyone, and everyone counts. So our mantra at Census is to count everyone once, only once, and in the right place. So even if your vehicle is your home, we want to make sure that you are aware how important it is to be counted at Census for all of those reasons that Brian talked about earlier, like the apportionment and funding for your local area. Those still matter. So you are counted no matter how mobile you are. So also, we'd like to make sure we thank everyone at the NVRC and the summit, and especially for Dr. Proust for inviting us, and Marika for all of the interaction that we've had with her, and hopefully she feels better soon. But like we mentioned earlier, if you have any additional questions, about census data or our data products, feel free to go to our website listed there, census.gov. You can also email me and Brian, and we will try to get you any answers. And for right now, we will go to the chat and see if there's any questions. Okay, so one question here. Are there targeted enumeration activities geared towards campgrounds, county/state, federal, capturing transient folks that may not participate in services on the pick counts? So, um, uh, I think the answer is yes. So pick counts are different. So on the surface, PID or the point in time is done by HUD, right? And so they have their way of counting, and the census, essentially, how we do ours is um, more like we try to get our census staff will in 2030 be hiring some people that will target and figure out where we need to do our counting, and we pre-identify. That's kind of part of that one program I was talking about with the targeted non-sheltered outdoor locations. So we try to identify where we need to go before we go out, go to those locations, and then count the people that we find there. And that's really it. Again, not sure about the question, but campgrounds are more the tra- um, transitory locations that Brian was discussing earlier. So, but if I haven't really answered your question, again, feel free to email me, and I'll try to kind of figure out what your question is and get you an answer. All right. So I'll go on to the next question. What are the qualifications for being an enumerator? Is it full-time, part-time? Is it a full-time job or part-time? Or is it a single responsibility of another job? And what kind of training do they get regarding approaching people in RVs, et cetera? Okay, so when the census starts, we will have a full kind of recruiting program and plan of who we hire and when we hire people. So, and you know, essentially to be an enumerator, there's no specialized training. We hire people. We used to have a test, no test anymore. We have an assessment, and anybody who comes, takes the assessment. We do have background checks that people have to take, security clearances and whatnot. And then they're just kind of hired based on where they live locally. So we provide training for all of the positions that we hire people at Census. So if they get hired to do enumeration for group quarters or for transitory locations, we give them that specific training. Okay, so Katrina asks, in 2020, there was some concern. Hold on. My screen. There was some concern about how SBE spots were chosen, where there'll be a change for 2030. So I kind of alluded to it earlier. We're hoping in 2030 to hire more people with experience, more what we've been calling outreach assistants. So we're hoping to hire people that may have had experience participating in the pit. Maybe they were a volunteer for the pit, or possibly provide services for some people experiencing homelessness. We have a way to hire or those people, like on the application, there'll be a question that ascertains to if they have um, experience in such a field, and that the census will be able to hire them. So we believe that is one way that will improve the targeting of where these locations are, where SBE locations are and getting people to participate. So let's see, Amanda, for locations that have a shortage of census staff, do you encourage nomads to apply to cover those areas? Yes, yeah. We, um, as part of the recruiting process, we hope to have folks that will be out there in your communities. We think it would be a great idea if nomads would come out and participate and become census employees. So that is definitely something also that I can take back to our recruiting and partnership area to make sure that they are aware that some people are looking for census jobs. Okay. Ruth asks, people who live nomadically and park on public land, such as BLM, Bureau of Land Management, or Forest Service, counted. So yes, yeah, and that's part of what Brian was talking about. And maybe, Brian, do you have anything else you might want to expand on with that?
Yes, this goes along also, Crystal. There was a question from Karen. How do you build your list of places? So we do a lot of research in the 10 years leading up to census, especially for transitory locations and group quarters. We do outreach to stakeholders, outreach to other agencies who are in charge of things like BLM and in national parks to create our list of places. So we might create a list of all the campgrounds and RV parks also through uh, um, national organizations uh, help us build these lists as well. So we once we build these lists and we know where these campgrounds and RV parks are, then we know where to send enumerators to. Now with something like public land such as BLM and Forest Service, we would work with an agency like that in the local office or the local area of BLM where people might be staying. We have something called advanced contact where we would call them and say, "Do you have anybody staying here during March and April? And if so, can you help us locate them?" And that's how we reach out to people and find people who are staying on uh, lands such as public lands that are more spread out than an actual campground.
Yeah, so I have another question here. How do you work with community-based organizations to advertise jobs, identify locations? And we do have a very extensive partnership program. And like Brian was talking about earlier, we do a lot of stakeholder outreach. And so it is very extensive, a lot, that really isn't Brian and I's area of expertise, but it is a lot. Like we just have large sectors of the census that are kind of devoted to partnership and getting the word out about the census in all of our programs. Okay, and I think we have one last question. For a vehicle resident that wants to be counted but does not pay for a spot or use social services, is there a way to self-report if a mobile site is not close? So yes, there is. They can use those mobile questionnaire assistance centers, or and also there's online. There's a way that you can respond online and over the phone. And once the 2030 census comes around, you will see those things advertised more. And also, I kind of forgot to mention earlier, but the census is committed to kind of coming to these events more, like getting the word out and talking more about opportunities uh, for the 2030 census and the whole lead up to it. So we're hoping this is just the start. This is our first time kind of presenting at the summit, and we hope to come back here in the future. Every year that they have it, hopefully we'll be able to send somebody and have more information, share more information, and learn new things. Okay, so I think that is we may have one last question here. I think this is more for Brian. When counting RV and vehicle homes, how do you determine which people are vehicle residents versus tourists? Do you knock on every door in the area that is recommended by the person you consult?
Yeah, so when we go to an RV park, we do have what's called advanced contact. So we do call all the RV parks, campgrounds, hotels on our in our universe, as we say. We schedule this appointment. So when we arrive at an RV park, we would go site an RV site, go site to site to site, and if something is not parked on that site, the site is empty. We skip it and move on to the next site. If there is an RV park there, we will knock on the door and attempt to make an interview. There is a question on the during the interview that we try to weed out people who are just there, because these are recreational places. These are places that people tend to go for weekends or just short-term vacations. We do have a question on the that we ask as soon as we introduce ourselves. That is. I don't know the exact wording, excuse me, but it's basically, are you here for a couple of days, or do you normally stay on the road? Do you have a place that you live or stay most of the time? And if you say that we are only here for a short time, we normally have a place, that we live or stay, then we would say thank you and respond to your census at that place. But if you spend most of your time on the road, or you spend an even amount of time on the road versus at a home, or you spend all your time on the road, then those are the people we capture. But we do have a question on our questionnaire that tries to get at who's short-term vacation versus who's living in a RV permanently, regardless of whether you're a snowbird or travel all the time. If you're living in an RV or having a nomad lifestyle most of the year, most of the time, then that's who we want to count in the transitory location operation.
Okay, so I think we don't have any more questions. Again, we encourage everyone to take our emails down and send us any other further questions that you may have. And again, thanks to everyone at the NVRC for this invitation to come and present. And have a good weekend and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you, everyone.